I'd like to thank you very much for having me on this esteemed occasion. I'm here to reveal to you the reasons for my being here with my military know-all. I'm here to tell you that I, Victor, am here to colonize this very space, this space right here and now, this space right there. Poof, there we go. I've colonized you now. So we together are here in cyberspace, colonizing each other as I speak. I mean, well, you colonize me through looking at me and capturing my essence, and I colonize you by being here and now, reporting to you live from the here and now inside this very Zoomish space. So I, Victor, have decided that Brexit is a schmexit, and there's nothing more that you can say to make me stay in the UK while Brexit is going on. So I shall choose to leave Brexit. So I'm exiting Brexit, you could say, and starting my own country right here now with you. Here, you are my loyal subjects. Here, that's exactly where that's where I'm colonizing. So you, my loyal subjects, are very welcome to, you're very welcome to be here with me in this. There are some mysteries in life that can never be explained away by logic or logos or anything like that. I, Victor, am here to colonize you. Ugh, need more fucking, I need some weapons. And not only do I need more weapons, but I need the agreement of a woman in charge who says that I can go ahead with this colonization. Yes, you have my agreement. There we go, as you heard it you heard it too. From the Queen herself, that she has given me the right to colonize your space in the here and now. There. Other than that, I have a few things to say about this new, Jesus. Sorry for that explosion. When you're in a war, they're bound to be, get rid of that one, this one's better. All Swedish made, I'll have you know. I received all these ammunitions from my favorite Swedish supplier. They're very beautiful. You can see them. Can you see them? Can you see them without fucking my own face up? Anyway, here I am with the Swedish weapons, colonizing this very space. The thing is, we don't have a name for this country, beside it being here and now between us. So if anyone would like to suggest a name for the country, we are having a raffle, and your chance is you can win a tongue, for example. For example, one of these. It's a sculpture of a tongue made by somebody. Anyway, that's beside the point. The main reason for this broadcast, this emergency broadcast, is to say that I will not tolerate any riots. I will not tolerate anybody trying to fuck up my sovereignty. I, Victor, am king of the world in this space. So anyone who has something against it, it's better like this or like this. We'll have a raffle about that too. Which way Which direction should my beret be in? This way or this way? Don't know what came over me there. Thank you very much. I just want to say, to end off this unexpected broadcast, I, Victor, am here because I've Brexited Brexit. I've left Brexit, and I shall now remain here in this space, colonizing you, 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 you. Do you like my ring? Farewell till the next time we meet in this colonized space.
And we're already on air. Stacey and Armando, you can come back, yes, to Zoom. So hello everyone who is watching us here and now in this present land, as you've written in the chat box on elektron.live. And I'm really happy to present to you our speakers, Armando Rotondi and Stacey Sacks. And maybe we can start with Stacey telling us what we've just witnessed. You're muted.
I was kind of laughing because I was thinking, you want me to explain my arse away? Or I think it's better if people reflect on what they just witnessed. I'm more interested in that kind of conversation. I think, well, I can just give some very basic background to maybe the character, or
Yeah, let's start with that.
Or about this question of what it means to perform in a Zoom space. I was really trying to figure out, and it was a total experiment. I mean, I just made that very on the spur of the moment and hadn't written a script or any idea, had no idea what I was going to say in the moment that I did it, except, of course, I did have some guns pre-made, prefabricated. But I was really interested in how I can bring my animation practice and my live performance practice into the Zoom space in such a way that to combine them and to find a kind of mashing up or a mishmash of different genres. And to just experiment with it, because I really believe that, well, I'm always working from the poesis of play. I'm always seeing play as the starting point. So for me, it was a way of exploring that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And also, what about the idea of liveness of this performance, that this one wasn't as live as it could be?
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to have sat here in my character and actually done this entire conversation with Armando in character. I think we could have yielded some interesting results. I do have the elements around, so I can stick on my mask and still appear. But for me, this question of liveness is always troubled, you know, and I'm not sure that it's ever possible for us to recreate theatre online. I don't think that's the point of this moment and what we're being called to do. I think the recreation is the problem. It has to be an adaptation. It has to be a reinvention. And of course, I do believe that the theatres are opening again, and they're slowly already doing that. Certainly in the Swedish context, there's many theatres are already open, and they just make sure that people have enough space around them. And it's still only, I think, 50 people who are allowed in the venue, so it's a bit of a challenge for 600 seaters and things like that. But I do believe theatre will come back. I don't think it's, I mean, theatre has survived much worse events than this. So it will come back. But for me, in the meantime, I'm really excited to explore other avenues and explore what does aliveness mean in a virtual realm. How can we touch each other through this medium of the screen? How can we move each other? How can I, as performing artist, engage in a moment's encounter with the people who are with me? How can we witness each other in this space?
Maybe Armando can pick up from there.
Yes, I find very interesting the idea of liveliness and exploring new space. I agree with Stacey that we cannot recreate a theater online, and that is not the point. So, but I don't think that the two things are excluding each other. So, probably what, for example, the COVID emergencies has underlined that we can explore also in emergency. And this is very beautiful because in emergencies, performing arts and arts generally produce a lot of innovation, a lot of interesting things. So the two elements of theater as a theater venue, as a theater building, and theater as we think theater, audience and performance in the same space, can go in parallel with another idea of the space that is, for example, this one, the virtual space that we are living now. I also find very interesting the word adaptation is about adaptation, it's about recreation, and I think there is always a misunderstanding, and I have to say there was a misunderstanding also with colleague that a very good practitioner, thinking that performing online is just broadcasting something online, something that we think that we should do live on a stage or in a specific live environment, and we are simply broadcasting on Zoom or on YouTube. Well, this is not the point. So I totally agree, and I think that the two things are not excluding because theater reopening, and I hope that will stay open and there will be not another emergency. But at the same time, we have other territories that we can explore, and the same practitioner can find different ways and different ways of understanding and developing their own art. So it's quite it's a very interesting period, let's say, for that.
Yeah, I would agree. Armando, I'm just wondering, because of course my perspective is always from the perspective of the performer, of the
Yep.
the artist working in the realm, as opposed to, even though I'm a director and a writer too, I can be outside. But I'm really trying to figure out how we can inject the complexity and the nuance of living performance into this framed virtual realm. You know, like how can we make space for multiple readings and for an infinity of possible interpretations in this space? Because we're kind of confined. We're still confined by the frame, and we're still confined by the, yeah.
I asked myself this question many times in the previous weeks, and I find an interesting for me an interesting point in working on Zoom, on working on YouTube, etc. That it was starting from the classical thing that we said when we study cinema, for example, the use of the camera in cinema, when we say that, for example, that the camera is not only saying to the audience what to look, but also how to look to stuff. So according to how we use the camera, if it's a close-up and so on. And for example, this is something that honestly, I feel that in theater cannot be possible because we can say what to look and how to look, but not 100%, simply because the audience can turn the face, can be distracted, cannot go into really close to the performers as it is in cinema, because it's a different medium and so on. I think this new digital can mix the two things together. And I noticed this when I was doing a workshop, like an induction workshop with Teatro de los Sentidos. So that was an online induction to their course. So the Teatro de los Sentidos in Barcelona with Enrique Vargas and so on. Doing this exercise as a student in that case, I was really asking myself, wow, this is really effective on Zoom because I feel that they're really looking into me and there is a one-to-one connection. And how is possible to recreate this same exercise live in a studio? So was almost the opposite because the exercise was born as an exercise in presence and they adapted online. And I felt, wow, is very effective here, but I don't think that could be so much effective if we were in the same in the same room with all the people around. It works because I am in a breakup room with the other participants. So was quite became very psychoanalytical in a way. So
But it's a
I think
fake
there
kind
are a lot.
of connection in
Sorry?
a way. It's a fake kind of connection in a way,
Oh,
because
yeah.
for me to really make you feel like I'm looking at you, here I am looking deeply into your eyes and you're feeling me and you're like, but of course I'm looking into the camera, and
Mhm.
all that's doing, it's making me a really good actor or appear like an actor who's connecting, but in actual fact, I'm not connecting at all. So is Zoom just breeding a group of really good Hollywood and Bollywood and Nollywood actors for the rest of time? Like people, and of course, actors are always taught never look at this, never look at the screen, never look at the camera, you know? So in a way, it's clown. It's like we're breaking the fourth wall of the film camera by staring into this to
But
find connection which we can never actually have, because I can't see your eyes at the same time as looking into the camera.
But for example, this one, I think, for example, working with the audience uh, is, it could be very interesting if, for example, now we have a performance with the audience. If we say to the audience, let's not have the video, so let's be just in like
Sounds
in sound, or we mute and without video, etc. We are doing a performance. Then suddenly we force one of the audience to switch on the camera, and then there is a complete reverse of the gaze. So the observer, in a way or not, the other one will be observed by the other group, and if they feel comfortable, because maybe they are watching a performance online in their room, so in a comfort zone, in a comfort space, suddenly they become themselves part of the performance. So I honestly, I come from very traditional theater, because, for example, as a scholar, I started with the 19th century theater. I started as a scholar of Ibsen, and my first love was Ibsen. For me, Ibsen is a god. But I feel that there is a lot to explore, and and these are tools that we can simply use. So in a way, is create something site specific, is website specific, but is creating something site specific, the way of site specific. So if it's site responsive or whatever, but simply that the site is a web site, is a digital site. That's it. For me, the way how we can work.
interesting. Site specific through the screen
Yeah.
in the site. That's part of the reason why my dictator character colonizes everybody looking at them. So he's always the king. He's always
Yeah.
he's found the perfect way to be the ultimate dictator, except with no power whatsoever, except for the power of being seen.
And not seeing the other one necessarily.
And exactly, well, yeah, doesn't want to know who's out there entirely, especially if there's only one person. It's better not to know.
And following that, if we talk about shared experiences in digital spaces, it sounds like it's possible only if it's something participatory. Like Armando was saying, when we ask the audience to turn on their cameras or to somehow turn their private into public, is this then the only way of the shared experience for online performance when the audience participates actively?
I don't know. I think for me, theater or performance, let's say rather, is always an encounter. Whether you need to have the actual eye contact or whether you need to have the knowledge of how many people are in the space, it's not necessarily the case, I think. I think we have to develop new ways of listening in general, and that listening being as expansive as possible. And well, let's put it this way, I'm always interested in what it means, this question of what it means to decolonize the gaze, and this question of how can we, I mean, this word decolonial is very overused, so I won't dwell on it right now, but the point of what I'm trying to say is that I can't always see it as me with this hierarchy of me feeding you with material and information all the time. But I don't necessarily know that there has to be this connection, eye to eye, space to space. I do believe that we can find ways in this medium of touching each other without both, of course, physical touch, but actual eye contact or seeing what's there. For me, it's all about expanded listening, investing in discovering more ways of hearing, listening, being with.
I like the concept of decolonize the gaze, and I think I totally agree with you that the lack of eye contact and direct contact can be problematic in a way, because in a way it's a performance that is an indirect, it will remain an indirect, is a live performance but not a direct performance necessarily. And but at the same time I feel that there is a lot of way how we can use these tools to work with, let's say, a thing that Zoom can do, absolutely, that digital can do, is to give us a wider audience, maybe not in terms of numbers, but in terms of variety of people that can participate, can attend an event. So for experience, I receive, for example, feedback on specific, or not me personally, but also in, let's say, in events that I attended, that probably I would have not expected if it was just in a single space. Also because there is something that in a theater cannot happen, but for example on this space can happen. And I'm not comparing the quality, because of course I'm not saying Zoom is better than theater, absolutely not. You can kick me out if I say something like that. But for example, the freedom of talking or express an opinion in the right moment that something happened, that it maybe not talking, but maybe through the chat. So through the chat, writing down the opinion, there is a sense of immediate reaction or feedback to something that we are watching. That could be good, can be bad, because can be good because it's in that moment, in that time. So in a way, there is a kind of hic et nunc. But at the same time, because I'm writing now what I think about what I'm watching, I don't have the real time of processing the information. Because basically in theater I have to maintain something for me. I watch the performance, I think about, and then I express. Here is everything can be very, very quick. So
Yeah,
it's good and it's bad.
there's this immediacy, this
Yeah.
feedback. If you're wanting that kind of feedback, I think there's some performers who would get really irritated constantly being interrupted by the spectators' kind of perspectives and attitudes towards what they're seeing. I think also it's a big question about access, because of course not everybody, we can, yes, of course it opens up in magnificent ways. I know that there's a comedian, Mark Lottering, in South Africa, who recently did a Zoom performance, and he had something like 20,000 people watching and made an incredible amount of money in a very short period of time. Great for him. And also, so that opens up the possibilities of what kind of audience you can get. But of course, it's not necessarily equal, because there's still many parts of the world where people don't have access to this kind of technology and the kind of the way in which art is being forced into this kind of digital realm. There are still lots of people who are being excluded from that, I think, which is an ethical problem that we need to figure out. I was just thinking about this question of transforming performance, and if we transform the way watching happens, then we can also transform the way listening happens. So I'm wondering what possibilities and potentials can emerge from these new interfaces and relations, and how that kind of relates to the ethics of the spectator artwork encounter, because I think there are critical political and ethical considerations here. around inclusion, hospitality, all of that, operations of transformation, things like that.
What?
I'm not saying we have any answers, but
No, but
just,
I'm very interested. For example, which kind of political, ethical, for example, issues, if you have any.
well, I think
Yeah.
for me, particularly this question around access that I've just spoken about, and the ethical question of, who, where, what, how am I, who am I addressing with my work? How am I addressing it? Especially in relation to laughter. Who is laughing? What are they laughing at? Where is the laughter happening? Like for me, these are important ethical questions as an artist working in the field of comedy and using play as an what I would call not aesthetic, but an aesthetic tool, like to think of it as an operation that's being performed through the senses. Like what am I offering my future audiences and my present audiences in that moment of encounter? That viscerality that I'm after as a performer. If I'm looking for connection and touch and moving, how can I? Yeah, it's all connecting to this question of what is presence.
It's a huge question.
I know.
It's,
We've got 30 minutes. Come on, we're going to solve it. No, I'm kidding.
It's not wow. It's very difficult to even think about because it's very, very, very big, very, very complicated. And I think apart from, together with the ethical and political elements, there is the creative elements that is at the base of everything, because basically they influence everything. So in a way is about how we will make our own art here, in a way also be completely faithful to our core beliefs as an artist, and if we have to reach some compromise with our core beliefs as artists, I feel. Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to this talk actually that he gave in 2014. Do you know the performance artist? I'm going to pronounce his name wrong because I don't know how to say it exactly, but it's Guillermo Gomes Piana. He's from La Pacha Nostra performance group, Mexican artist. But I watched, he gave a TED talk in Cal Arts, like 2014, but it's still so relevant. And he said something like democracy cannot thrive without art, without the critical voice of the artist constantly testing its limits and possibility. And he says that democracy, it cannot exist without the ethical mirror of art reflecting these distorted features of power, that it's not possible.
Well, for example, my students knows that one of the first things that I repeat is that arts, and including theater, is always political. So arts for me is always a political act. It doesn't matter if we are doing, if we are creating a very political committed theater company, or if we are just performing Neil Simon, The Odd Couple. In any case, we are passing the vision of a specific way how to see the world. So there is always, you said before, the hierarchy. So for me, there is always a matter of cultural hegemony. So I like quite a lot Gramsci. So in any case, art is always a political statement, a political act. It doesn't matter if we do it consciousness or not. So I totally agree with this relation of culture and arts and democracy. But sometimes I don't feel that arts is only, there cannot be democracy without arts, because arts can also be sometimes a little bit dangerous, because we cannot deny that there were some kind of arts that were part of a kind of intelligentsia, so organic or not organic kind of art. So it's a very wide, really, really wide topic.
Yeah, it is. And also the fact that, well, transgression and subversion have been so subsumed by kind of our neoliberal value systems. So what happens when dissent is swallowed by the system? What happens to the sense?
I like what you said, like subversive, because for example now I worked in the last years a lot on the relation between democracy and politics and theater, and working, for example, on a specific case of Romania under Ceausescu, and how the politics and the specific historical period was treated through arts. And the idea was that the history is a tragedy, so necessarily in specific contexts they have to be reproduced with a farce. So like absurdist theater or an absurdist context, because in a way there are different aspects like impossibility of real commenting, but the needs of commenting what is happening because of censorship. So I cannot real comment my word, but I need to comment because is happening something. So I cannot do it openly. So necessarily, to be subversive, I have to be farsesque. I cannot be. I cannot.
To be subversive, you have to be
Farsesque, farce, like laughing.
Right.
Yeah.
So using parody and satire.
Exactly. And in that case, because parody, for example, as Butler said, for the parody is always a subversive act. Parody is always subversive, according to Butler. So I feel quite close to this relation between arts and not only arts and politics, but also arts and history, really with big H. So that is a kind of commentary of what is happening.
I mean, to be honest, I mean, this character of my dictator, for example, is a very old character which has gone through several renovations since the first time I did it, and realized through processes of just coming to face what was happening in the world and acknowledging my own entitlement based on my own sense of white privilege. In a way, I had to kind of really question deeply my impulse towards creating this dictator character, because it originated as a kind of parody of what I'd experienced as African dictatorship, having been brought up and grown up in Zimbabwe, where we had a dictator for 37 years, most of my life. So I felt very entitled in a way to make this character. And then the character is now shifted towards this British kind of dictator. But I felt the need that the dictator needs to come back at these times, especially when you look at what's happening in Belarus, you look at Lukashenko and the way he's holding on to power, and the fact that that's happening in so many places across the world. You know, that I feel that this character of the dictator as a parody and as a there has to be, I can't put him aside because he's still so relevant. It's really important to me that this, not that I believe that parody cannot also be used by the hegemonic kind of structures to reinforce a univocal perspective. I think it's very possible that parody and satire can be utilized by a state, an oppressive state, as well. But of course, yeah, generally it does lie in the field of subversion. Although you can also look at the fact of all these comedy channels, satire, parody channels, and in a way go, well, of what good have they done in the grand scheme of things? I mean, I don't know practically if parody does have any real consequence in the world besides making people feel good for a short while.
And following this topic, we also have a question from people who are listening to us right now, is that in this idea that art is always political, which I agree with, how do we deal with the art produced in privileged societies which refuses to acknowledge itself as political and in some cases continues to commit the same mistakes regarding cultural appropriation, inequality, racism, etc.? So how do we address the privileged artists in the world of today who refuse to acknowledge art as political?
Sorry, the privileged artists, they refuse to consider their art political.
Yes, how do we address privileged artists who refuse to acknowledge art as political?
Well, I feel that probably 90% of the artists in the world, they feel that their art is not political. If they're mainstream artists doing, I don't know, a comedy movie like in my country, they do like Cinepanettone, that is the classical comedy for the winter time. They would never say my movie is a political movie. But the problem is that it doesn't matter, because in any case, art is a kind of systemic good. It's part of a system. It's a part of a more complex system. So they are the same time the product. This art is the product and the vehicle for this idea of the world. So it's not really important if they consider themselves as political or if they don't acknowledge, because they simply are. So in a way, and in this case, it's very difficult. We cannot force them to change their mind. We cannot force them with a gun. Say that you are a political artist if they don't want, because we know that they are implicitly, unconsciously, they are, because they are part of a political idea, of a hegemonic idea of the world. What we should do are the people that are committed. Step by step we can change, and we have to know in a way or in another one that it will be traumatic and it will need long time. So we cannot think that we can change the world without a traumatic and anything traumatic, because in any case or in another one, if to move to a vision of the world, to another vision of the world, it means that we are changing the power relation in a way or in another one. So there is relations that are changing, and they must change. So, for example, there is the news of the Oscar, of the Academy Awards, the new parameters for the Oscar for the best movie. Then in 2024 they have to consider inclusion as one of the main parameters, together with other ones that are related to the production value. It's a way, for me, honestly, now please don't shoot at me. It's still a little bit it's still a little bit superficial as a way, because is something that is considering something creative, but it should be written in much more detail, because there will be always the exception that will destroy the rule. And this will be very, very complex. So we have to be very, very careful in all this parameter. There is a very funny Hungarian play written by a Hungarian writer in Romania, in Transylvania, during the communist regime, that is about rule, and said there is no exception to the rule apart the exception to the rule itself. Because of this exception, we will fortify the rule, etc., etc., etc. That is a very long monologue, just working on two words: exception and rule, and it's impossible to understand this monologue. But we understand that if there is a rule, there will be always the problem on this rule. So is very complicated. Personally, I think that all the artists are doing politics. Everyone. Also now in this moment, us. So
whether they acknowledge it or not.
yeah.
Well, yeah. I think also when you're speaking about this exception rule nonsense, I'm beginning to think that given the world as it is, that absurdity and nonsense are our only outlet in a way. Like, all these things happening, you're talking about history with the capital H, and the ways in which history goes in spirals and circles and circles back. And I'm beginning to feel the pull towards the Dada and the surrealism, because it's the only thing that makes sense. And then you look at it in terms of what happened just when Dadaism kind of emerged. The World War happened shortly afterwards, right? So World War II. So it's interesting I feel it very strongly. I speak to a lot of my artist friends who feel it too, this pull towards the nonsense. But going back to this question that the person asked, I do think also that, well, firstly, the problematics of the word inclusion and diversity. If you know, diversity is such a big buzzword and everybody loves using it, especially giant corporations speaking about their, you know, oh, we've got diversity programs. But my question really is always, well, diversity from whose perspective? Who is the diverse? You know, if you're holding diversity workshops in South Africa where the majority of the population are Black South Africans, what is the diversity always assumes a norm. And so what norm are you kind of propagating with investing in this word diversity? That's a problem. And for me as well, in terms of if you feel that a work is political and the people who are performing it are not explicitly labeling it a political act, then it's for the spectator to get involved and to, if you're so inspired, call it out. You know, I mean, I'm not one for big Twitter wars. I do not enjoy engaging in these online arguments that happen on Facebook and this endless, like, long threads that go on. And somehow without the face there, people feel quite free to kind of be very cruel to each other. I'm not for that. But I do think that there's something to be said for calling out bullshit when you see it.
And can I add? I think there is also another point that, in a way, is kind of reproducing sometimes something that, for example, Harold Bloom, when he worked on the idea of the canon, was pointing out that personally I disagree with Harold Bloom and how he created the canon. So in this case, I'm just reporting an idea. I'm not, let's say, embracing the idea of Bloom, because he said, for example, he was very critical with what he called the school of resentments. So in terms of inclusion, and I feel that he's wrong on this point and he's wrong in many other points. And I don't want to, because it's about literature, but just to say that in reality, this is something that in academy, in other fields, for example, in this case, comparative literature and literature studies, is a long-term discussion. Is a very long-term. Is a very long date discussion. It's very difficult to have an end in short term, honestly.
I don't believe in ends, by the way. There can never be an end. There's always just an ongoingness. If we reach an end, we die. Should I mute myself now?
No, you shouldn't. While we still have time and started already talking about apocalyptic scenarios, we can move to Armando's project. Maybe he can talk a little bit more about RUR that he's developing together with Gibar Amut. Yeah, Gibar Amut. Yes, Armando.
Okay, I don't know if you, for the clip that I don't know if you will watch the clip later or was on Facebook. So this is a project, RUR, that is Rossum's Universal Robots, is an acronym, with a play by Karel Čapek, written in 1920. And basically, Karel Čapek, with this play, created the idea of the robots as we think nowadays the robots. So the robots that later will be developed by Asimov, in science fiction, so the real robots and so on, even in Metropolis by Fritz Lang, that was 1927. With Guy Baramots, we are working on this project to transform the play by Karel Čapek, that is a very conventional play in the way how it was written, into an immersive art installation, performative installation, mixing together the live performers and robotic mask, so mechanic robotic mask, working on also on a software with Piero O'Hanlon, that is a professor in the UK, where basically the idea is to move from something conventional as the play by Karel Čapek, Czech Bohemian writers, and so on, great writers, both in theater and also in fiction, to something that is mixing together element of post-dramatic theater and also post-humanism. So the idea of the mechanic world, of the robotic world, of the cyborg, together with a dramaturgy, playwriting that is divided into 3 steps. So the first part, adapted, or the dramaturgy is adapted by me from the original play, very conventional. A second that is becoming very post-dramatic, a third one post-dramatic. So moving to the real Karel Čapek, so the 5 acts of Karel Čapek into 3 sections, from something very conventional to something very post-dramatic. The interesting thing in the masks that are created by Guy Baramos, that is also part of his career, working a lot on this relation between mechanism and human being, robot and human being, mask in a very specific way. Guy, for example, made really wonderful mask only using papers that were talking. They were really, really great for a previous exhibition. Is to also to have a specific vision on what is a robot and what is a human being. And in this case, for example, from a performative perspective, we have to face, or to not to compare, but there are so many other references in theater, and everyone has a specific idea of how a robot should be on stage and how a robot should be in our life. For example, we think at the Rimini Protocol with Stefan Kegi, that they work with, Stefan Kegi worked with Thomas Melle for the Uncanny Valley project, where basically the robot on stage was exactly a reproduction of Thomas Melle, who wrote the text, give the voice, but it was exactly him. And there was a very interesting moment when the robot is controlling another robot. But the interesting thing that the robot Thomas Melle was talking as Thomas Melle. So when I watched the performance of the Rimini Protocol, in that moment, I really bought the idea that robot on stage has a kind of consciousness, because it was not, it was the real Thomas Melle in the shape of a robot, because it was a robot with his face, controlling someone without knowing that he was himself a robot. It's very complicated, as I said, but if you watch it, it will become much more clear. Or, for example, also the Hirata Oriza production, the one of the that is very interesting, because Hirata Oriza in Japan, he talk about intimate conversational theater. And if we hear like about conversational theater, it seems very realistic, almost naturalistic as an expression. Conversational theater, theater of the conversation. But most of the time it's me talking with something that is automatic, a robot. So he performed like Three Sisters robo version or Android version. He worked on also very conventional or traditional play that he adapted, like Chekhov, like Ibsen, like other one, mixing together the robots and not robots. For us, and this is a very strong idea of Guy, and I'm with him surely, is not to find the uncanny valley, not to go into the uncanny valley. So that moment where the robot is not exactly like us, but is not a clear robot. So we are in something that is uncanny, unheimlich. So the sensation that we can have in watching it, but we have to see the mechanism. We have to see how it works. We have to see the robotic part. And for this reason, also the visual elements of this robotic mask are done in a very specific way, with all the wire that you can see very clearly, the wire and so on, but dressed by the human being. Also in this specific case of RUR, dressed by the human being. So is really mixing together the two things. And this is part of some project that I'm working on related to for example, technology, science, and performing arts, because there is this one with Guy. Then I'm also working on an adaptation of a Brave New World that I've written from Aldous Huxley, and we are trying to move Aldous Huxley to, this will be in presence, but now we're doing a podcast to COVID, for COVID reason. So when we'll be in presence, we'll be starting as Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and step by step moving into a Turing test for the audience. Instead of understanding who is a robot and who is a human being, who is the new citizen, who is the old world citizen. So starting very conventional, and step by step, we are trying to become very immersive and creating a Turing test for the audience without saying to the audience, this is a Turing test. We're adapting a Turing test.
Interesting. Can I ask you something in terms of this question of the humanoid robot in a way? Because I'm really interested by the way in which, for example, you must know about Sophia, the robot who received actual citizenship in Saudi Arabia last year. So what does it mean for a society where a robot can be given citizenship, where people are fighting for it still? It's really dystopic. And I'm wondering if because I don't know the Karel Čapek, did you say?
Čapek, Karel Čapek.
Čapek. I don't know the play, and it's kind of how it evolves. So I'd be interested to know, are you going to make the whole play, or is it just using the play as a springboard to explore these intersections?
We adapted the play. I shortened the play because the play was very long, was 5 acts, very, very long. And the plot of the play is interesting because they started with the idea of the robots that now I'm not a scholar of Slavonic language, but robots, for example, in many Slavonic language, the etymology can be like workers or even servants, slaves, and so on. So something that is someone who is working for. And the idea is that we, in the play, created by Rossum, we have these robots that are working for this man, Harry Domino. Rossum, so reason, Harry Domino, Dominus, Harry Lord, Harry Landlord, Harry the owner. So in the play, every single human being character has a specific nomen omen, so has a specific name with a specific with a specific meaning. And in the play, simply step by step, there will be the revolution. So the robots will have a revolution. They conquer the world, and I don't want to spoil how it ends, but they conquer the world. So there is a point that is about that Karel Čapek at the end show a kind of paradox in this relation between human being and robots. If one of them let's say, has a complete hegemony of power. And we want to leave the audience with this, let's say, kind of understanding or kind of, they have to think about it. For this reason, we would like that the performance and the installation should be very immersive, probably with headphone, in order to create a kind of personal path for the audience into this this factory. So this factory where they are. I have to say the play is quite important because it gives the idea of the robots as we had nowadays. Of course, there were previous example of mechanical, let's say, not mechanic figure that start to have a consciousness. If we think at the golem, is very similar in many aspects. They're a common trait. But in this case, for example, the immediate results was the influence that he had with on Fritz Lang and Thea von Arbu for Metropolis, first the novel and then the movie, together with another play that is The Agony of the Machine by Ruggero Vasari. But in that case, is a play very close to futurism. Here, the way of writing was very conventional, but I like it to transform it in a post-dramatic play with post-human, because post-dramatic started a little bit before, I think, the idea of post-human, but I think in this case they can go together. So they can really go together.
There's so many questions. We don't have time to go through it all. I've got you on Facebook. I'll write you.
That's great. And we have only 5 minutes left so far. And it seems that, yeah, there are so many questions still to explore. But maybe we can make a step back to the previous topic as well. And I'd like to ask you how you personally engage in online performance, or how do you see your work maybe within this field?
Well, I'm just getting over this feeling of, well, the knock that came with COVID, the kind of enforced isolation, not so much in Sweden, but I did it anyway. I did isolate myself quite a lot because I was quite freaked out by the Swedish government's response to, which turns out quite well. But I can say that I mean, I'm only just beginning to get to grips with the idea of what it means to have to shift my live performance into an online realm. And I'm not sure that I can do it as such. I think you need a huge platform to be able to reach a massive amount of people. You need to already have a degree of a following in a way, which I don't necessarily have yet. Or at least it's quite dispersed and they're all made up of friends and families. So I'm still in the process of trying to figure out where online performance, how I can kind of play with it. I'm in the process of creating what I perceive as an all-day late night show. So it's taking the late night show concept and turning it a bit on its head, and it's called Nothing Special. And I'm really looking at the extraordinariness of the everyday, of the ordinary, and questioning how we can turn our attention back to the ordinary and move away from this idea of spectacularity, but yet how do we discover the spectacularity in the most mundane? And in that way, maybe see ways for myself, certainly, of reigniting a sense of magic in the everyday, which I think is the only way forward for me as a performing artist. How about you, Armando?
For me, first of all, I want to say the Brave New World is together with an Italian director called Vincenzo Liguori, because I forgot to say his name when I was also saying about the Brave New World. For me,
you say these names and I hear blah 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 blah.
So now for the online performance, I feel I'm very interested in the use of the space for the online performance, but not necessarily the space behind me, but the space on the screen. For example, I was in one of the as an observer in one of the session with Daniel with Daniel Wetzel, and was so interesting to listen them talking about the space. And I feel very interesting to manipulate the space, because one of the base of the theater is sharing the space, sharing the same space. And now we are in different places, but we are also sharing a space, even if it's not a physical space, that is this Zoom and so on. So for this, for example, I'm not really interested necessarily on YouTube or Instagram and so on, where for me it's more broadcasting, but really manipulating the space and see the potential of the space. So treating the screen and for example, in this case, Zoom, as a kind of really site or landscape. There was a very fascinating concept by a French philosopher called Alain Roger, a philosopher working in, for example, in landscape architecture. It is one of artialization. So how we transform the landscape in art. and we can do in two different ways, or in visu or in situ. So in situ, manipulating really the site, creating a monument, doing whatever we want, but in working in a very deep way on the physical aspect of a landscape, or in situ, according to the eyes of the spectator or the eyes of the artist. For example, we see the Monument Valley in the US, and we feel that is a far west movie. It is a Western movie by John Ford and so on, because the vision on this landscape transform our ways of understanding the landscape. And for me, working on the virtual space, trying to make the virtual space a kind of art itself, working on the possibility of working on a different vision that we can give to the audience, is what is interesting me now. So for me, also performing, not be physically on the screen, but just performing maybe with something on the screen, but even a live performance, but me on somewhere else. So it happens, for example, with the thing that we developed with Daniel, that I was simply typing and then there was a voice, but so the screen was telling something and the performers were telling these things being somewhere else. So I like to manipulate the virtual space.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And also what you've been telling about manipulating the visual space, we also witnessed it partially also in Stacey's performance today when you were interacting with your animations on the background. That is really an interesting way of using just such a simple tool as virtual background, to which we are already used on Zoom that much. It's just one small thing, but that already gives so many possibilities of playing with this window.
And if you think that that was an improvisation as well, that I had no idea when I started it that I would actually do that. So it was something that came into being in the moment of the doing. And I think if we are forced as performing artists to remain inside the frame of the space, we're going to have to find ways, new ways of doing it. And we can only do that through processes of discovery and recreation and co-creation. So I just want to thank you, Bodana and elektron.live, for making this conversation possible.
And I also want to thank Bogdan and all the organization of the festival for the invitation to have the possibility to have this very nice chat with you and with Stacey. It was very, very cool.
Aww.
Beautiful thoughts.
Yes, thank you for joining us, and thank you for everyone who was listening throughout the discussion on elektron.live. It was really great to hear your ideas and your experiences, and I do hope that we will see each other again somehow, somewhere, sometime. And also, we would like to invite everyone to the online performance that will happen on Thursday, also on elektron.live platform, by one young Estonian theater director, Alicia Yevtukhova. It will start at 7 p.m. Estonian time. So we'll be glad to see you on elektron.live again. And Stacey, Armando, thank you again for joining us.